What I wish my father taught me was the important qualities that make relationships work. And this applies to any kind of relationship, intimate relationships, just normal friendships, even very, very sociable relationships, even acquaintances. This is lecture number 4 in this new lecture series, What I Wish My Father Taught Me. And in today's session, I'm going to be talking about something that I pondered on yesterday evening. And I came up with, and I know there are more, but I came up with 7 traits and 7 qualities that I wish I was aware of every time I started a relationship. And as I go through these 7 qualities, I think it's going to become very clear that each of these qualities is very important. As a matter of fact, I would possibly recommend that you start using these 7 character traits as a benchmark for assessing all of your relationships. So what I wish my father taught me were the qualities that I should always look out for in every relationship. Number 1, I would say the first is temperament. Temperament. It's a very unique word, and it's not one of the words that we use too often, especially nowadays. You rarely find someone say, well, I like that man, or I like that woman, or I like that person, because they have good and a strong temperament. I'd like you to spend some time. I can spend, so much time going through each of these qualities, but I think in addition to you listening and learning, you have to become what I call a sophisticated researcher. And that simply means don't just be a listener, don't just be a follower of what people give you in relation to information. You have to become a student. You have to become disciplined as a researcher, meaning you take the information and then you go and research and study, and then you contrast and compare, and then make a decision as to whether you think the information was right for you or not. But the first quality, I think, that is essential in every relationships, more importantly in intimate relationships. If you're about to find your best mate, if you're trying to select your future partner, if you're trying to select perhaps someone you're going to share and spend a significant part of your time with, whether intimately or non-intimately, you must ask yourself this question: do they have the quality and the traits of temperaments? Temperaments, very important. And what is temperament? What is having a temperate quality? Well, it's simply having the emotion and the mental and the physical attributes and traits of someone who has a level of stability, and probably the better word to use is someone who has the right attitude. Someone once said that attitude is everything, that your life increases in proportion or decreases in proportion to the level of your attitude. If you fly planes, normally in planes, they have in what we call the plane board, you have something called an altitude gauge, and it shows you effectively is measuring the distance and the level of horizontal inclination as far as you travel. So if you go up, you say that the altitude of the plane is tilted up because it's measured from the nose of the plane. If the nose of the plane is tilted up, the plane starts to go up. So the direction of the nose of the plane determines the plane's altitude. And so we use the reference that your attitude is similar to the altitude of a plane. Therefore, positive attitude, right attitude elevates you. Negative attitude, poor attitude, sends you downwards in a downward spiral. Temperament, it's similar to attitude, but it's not just attitude in behavior, it's attitude in how one thinks, it's attitude in how one communicates, it's attitude in the actions one takes. So you must have a good temperament in order for you to consider that person to be perhaps someone worth sharing a significant portion of your time, your energy, your resources with. So quality trait number one is temperament. Very important. I'll let you do your research and understand a little bit more about it. But if you study temperament, what you realize actually that in every relationship, you have to ask yourself, how would someone react? If something happens, how do they react? Now, those with good temperaments tend to, I'll use the word, respond to things that happen in life, as opposed to people who are very reactive. Now, I've traveled all over the world. There are countries I haven't been to, but I've been lucky enough to visit many different countries and see different cultures. I'm not going to use names, but I would say this, that there are some cultures where you go to and they're very passionate in expressing themselves. They're very expressive. You can see the expression in their body language, the tone of their voice, the various muscles of their faces and how it's used. I know we often say that you have to respect one's culture. I agree with that. One of the things you have to do is also study your culture, because in many cases, what is a culture? A culture is simply habits, paradigms that have been selected and practiced by a group of people. That behavior becomes conditioned into the individual's lifestyle. So sometimes you don't even know what you're doing. And I've seen this as I travel and I meet people from different walks of life, that there are some people who are a little bit more reserved and they have a little bit more temperaments. If something happens, they take a step back and say, well, let me not react. Let me just absorb the information. Let me ask a question. Let me understand the reasoning behind what happened before I maybe pass a judgment. And effectively, temperament is really emotional stability, having emotional intelligence. Now, we know very well that most people who have what we call a high IQ, your intellectual quotient, are able to solve, but usually potential complicated questions. So the measure of your intellectual ability is referenced by something we call your IQ. Well, we have something called your EQ, which is your emotional quotient. Some people use the word EI, which is your emotional intelligence. And so temperament is really a measure of your emotional maturity, your emotional stability, your ability to understand and absorb information and distinguish between what is the noise and what is the signal. Now that's very important. Distinguish between what's the noise and what's the signal. What is the message hidden in the experience, as opposed to just being very reactive. So that's number one. Number two is attentiveness. I like that word, attentiveness. If you're going to be making a decision, an important decision, as to whether someone should be in your life for long, either as a partner, either as a loved one, either someone intimate. If you're making a decision as to whether you're going to be good friends and spend more time with someone, you always have to ask yourself the question, are they attentive? Now, why do you want to look for the quality of attentiveness? Well, you and I have needs, and every human being has needs. Attentiveness, I like the word because you could almost substitute, not in all areas, but in some areas, that word with caring. Now, some people say, I love you, but you can't love someone until you care for someone. And you can't be attentive to someone unless you care for someone and you have an expression of love in any form you choose. Attentiveness is simply being aware of my needs and being willing to provide those needs before I ask for it. That's what caring is all about. To care for someone, it means that you anticipate the person's needs and then you provide what they need before they ask for that need. So for example, if we are friends, one thing I have to do is I have to study you, I have to observe you, I have to be aware of what you want. Now, by studying you, I'm investing my time in you, and that means that I'm really, really interested in what makes you happy, what makes you sad, what turns you on, what turns you off, What are your dreams? What are your goals? What are your aspirations? What are your fears? Where are you running from? In other words, is there a past that you want to let go of? Are there habits you want to let go of? The fact that I'm doing all of that means that I'm trying to be attentive to your needs. Once I've studied you, then what I have to now do is come up with those needs and provide you with the needs in three ways. Number one, when you need it. So provide what you need when you need it. Number two, before you need it, which means I reassure you in subtle ways that I'm always going to be there for you. And number three, the willingness to take that need and put it aside and adapt, give you something else when perhaps you've changed. So quality number two is attentiveness. Intimacy and romance thrives on the foundation of attentiveness. And that simply means that I don't always have to ask you to do something for me, that you anticipate my needs, and then you try to fulfill those needs even before I ask for it. Attentiveness is very important. There is no relationship. Now, if you look at business, and this applies to even business, if you look at the business, the quality of most relationships in business comes as a result of one person anticipating another person's needs, saying, I think you might have this particular issue or problem, and we can solve that problem for you. And this is how we're going to solve it. And when we're done solving it, we can promise you that your performance, your value, your service will have increased from where you are now to a much higher place. Attentiveness. So that's quality number two. Quality number three is adaptability. Adaptability. I'm going to contradict myself very slightly here because I want you to be very careful about this quality. I've seen so many people adopt this particular trait, this particular quality, to the detriment. As a matter of fact, if you're not careful, you lose yourself in a relationship because you're too adaptable. I thought about this quality for a number of minutes when it popped into my head, adaptability, and I thought, one has to be very careful because adaptability should have a reward. Now be careful now. Adaptability should not be a lifestyle. Adaptability means your willingness to move, change with any external stimuli. In this case, is perhaps the person you're trying to be in relationship with. I'll give you a good example. Lao Tzu, who was probably one of the, I would call him the spiritual head of most Asiatic countries. Primarily, he influenced Confucius and the Confucian philosophy. So a lot of the Asian countries, particularly China and the neighboring countries, have based their philosophy on Lao Tzu's teachings. And one of the things he said very easily, he said that you can't be rigid in life. He says, when you're born soft, flexible. When you die, you're stiff. So he said, stiffness is synonymous with death, and flexibility is synonymous with life. Meaning, you watch perhaps in a forest, the wind blows. The trees that are fixed, that will not move, will not buck, or the trees that have branches that refuse to, be adaptable, usually get taken off or blown off by the wind. They break. The ones that are able to just bend, they survive. You have to be adaptable. So you're looking for a relationship where the individual is adaptable. However, you want them to be adaptable to your needs without losing themselves, because otherwise you then have this pressure on you, which no one should have, where someone says, well, I changed. I gave up everything for you. No, I don't want that. I want you to be you. I want you to be happy. I want you to be hopeful. I want you to be healthy. What I need you to do is to be adaptable to my growth and my development. I'll give you a classic example of how this potentially could work. The mistake most people make in relationships is you meet someone and you expect them to be that same person 20 years from now. That's not just naive. That is very, very unfair. That doesn't follow the golden rule. The golden rule says, do unto others as you would that they do unto you. We have to grow. In life, there's a law. It's a law. You're either growing or you're dying. You're creating or you're disintegrating. Nothing stays the same. The idea that something stays the same is an indication of the ignorance of the laws of nature, the laws of life. Nothing stays the same. Spirit always moves. And that's the reason why there's a time for everything under the sun. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to party and a time to be sober. You have to keep moving. So change is a constant. By being adaptable, what we're saying here is you want to find someone who, as you develop and as you grow, they're happy to dance with you. I'll give you a good example. If you've ever ridden a motorbike, and the motorbike has a passenger seat, maybe it's a sports bike, what you find is the person driving, as you drive very fast, as you go into a turn, so you come into a turn, you have to bend with the bike. What you want is, if you're carrying a passenger behind you, in this case, this is the person who you're looking to be in relationship with, you want them to have just the common sense and the understanding that they have to lean with you on the turn. So as you bend, they bend. Whenever you see people have serious motorbike accidents, it's usually where one person who's driving, in this case I'll use you as the example, leans, and the person behind leans the other way. So I'm going to say this. There are times when you need to have a balance. I'm not talking about those states. What I'm talking about is in the event where you're trying to lean, saying something is changing, and the person behind says, no, we're going to stay where we are. Something always happens, and that is an accident occurs. So adaptability has its place. It shouldn't be a lifestyle. You do not want people who adapt every single minute. You want to have people who have an idea about who they are. They have a sense of self-worth, self-image. You want to have people who have values, principles and beliefs, but people who can, in many ways, accommodate your growth and your development. I usually ask people this question. Whenever they say to me, well, I've met someone and we're good friends, whether that's an intimate relationship or whether that be a neutral, non-intimate relationship, I ask the question. I said, how do they react to you whenever you celebrate good news? Whenever you celebrate your success, how do they react? Because most people are happy being your friend and having you around until they see you achieve your goals. And then you notice a sudden change in attitude. So adaptability is trait quality number 3. Number 4, kindness. Kindness. I heard a story told some time back about I think this was, I cannot remember the particular region, but it was a Japanese man who, back in the, going back in the times where we had the concentration camps and that sad period, he was in a position of authority, and he was positioned in a location whereby he couldn't allow a number of Jews to leave the country. And the Jews at that point in time were being severely discriminated against and persecuted and even killed. And he had a great heart, and he wrote to his seniors back in their headquarters in a different city. I think it was back in Japan, who was stationed there, and he said, listen, there's a lot going on here that you guys don't understand. There's a lot of killing. There's great people are being massacred. We have to authorize visas. So he worked in the consulate. We have to authorize visas to allow these people to get out of the country so that they can find safety. And his instructors and his managers, supervisors, rejected his request. So he took matters into his own hand and he authorized a lot of visas. As a matter of fact, there were so many people that what he started doing is he would take what we call a group visa. So he would get maybe 10 people, he would put their names down, and then he would give one visa covering those 10 people. And he worked overnight and he kept issuing and issuing and issuing a lot of visas. And as a result of that, so many people were saved. Eventually, he was caught by his supervisors and he was severely reprimanded. And so many years afterwards, he was reprimanded to the point where he was delegated and put in a very small outstation in a different country. Effectively, they couldn't sentence him because he was he was a citizen of Japan. They couldn't sentence him. So what they did is they sent him to an outstation after, reducing his salary, effectively taking him to the point where, he couldn't really survive. They sent him to a different outstation in a different country where he could just really suffer. About 20, 30 years after that experience, a group of people got together and they traveled. They made inquiries and they traveled all the way down to that particular small city in search of this man. Why? Because these same people were some of them were the same people, some of them were the children of the people that he set free. They went looking for him and they met him. By this time he was probably maybe in his 90s, quite old and frail and weak. And they asked him, why did you do it? Your life was at stake. You risked everything. You lost everything. But why did you go through this pain of putting everything on the line to save a number of people and a group of people who didn't have the same faith, who didn't have the same belief, and who would probably never have been of any value to you in terms of reciprocity? And he said something that I thought was beautiful. He said, because it was the right thing to do. And that made me think, wow. In that moment, I realized what he was exuding was kindness. Kindness. We know about the story about the Good Samaritan. A young person, I think he was young, was attacked by the side of the road and left there for dead. People walked past, came by, a priest came by, saw him and moved on. Eventually someone came, saw him, stopped, attended to his needs, covered up his wounds, took him, put him on the horse or whatever traveling means that they were using back then. Now this is what's interesting about the story. The person traveling, the Good Samaritan who was traveling, had somewhere to go to. He got interrupted. He got delayed. His conscience couldn't let him keep going, so he stopped. And he did something that I think is beautiful, which is, if the roles were reversed, what would you wish upon yourself? And what would you wish from another person? He took this person back to a nearby safe place, paid someone to look after him before setting back on his journey. That is kindness. And for that reason, the story has been told for more than 2,000 years now about the Good Samaritan, which simply means that you need to have kindness. Now, all of us have the ability to be kind. If you're trying to find a relationship that's going to work, what you want is to identify people, not just with the potential, because we all have the potential, but people who the acts of kindness come naturally. Most people have this one of two different mindsets. One is an entitlement mindset, whereby you feel something is owed to you. And the second is an exchange mindset, whereby you think, before I do an act of kindness for you, I need to know what I'm going to get back in return. You want people who will be kind no matter what, and who are willing to do the right thing. So that's quality number 4. So let me just summarize the 4 of them. I said the first is temperament, the second is attentiveness, the third, which I thought, when I started, I thought, well, this is interesting. Why would you even consider these qualities in the sequence? Now, remember something, perhaps I should say this. These qualities don't have to be in a sequence. I'm just sharing some thoughts. I'm not saying these are the most important. You have to decide for yourself. Like everything in life, you have to decide for yourself. But I was thinking about it yesterday, and I thought, what would I have wished that I knew quite early? What were the qualities? Because I started thinking about and replaying my relationships and my present relationships and saying, wow, if I knew what I know now, are there some relationships that I would have held on to? And are there some relationships that I would have never gone into? Now, I think what I might do, perhaps I should probably make a note of this. What I might do is I'm going to do a session or a series and tell you, teach you or share. And the topic might be something like mistakes I've made in relationships. I think that's probably going to be interesting because I've made so many mistakes. There's so many relationships that I let go of, which I should never have let go of. And I did because I was naive and because I was probably not smart. That's probably the best way to put it. I wasn't aware of what I had. And there were some relationships that I should never have gone into. And there's some relationships that I went into and I stayed longer than I should. And I think it'd be useful to share some of that. So we talked about attentiveness, which is the second. We talked about temperament, which is the first. And the third was adaptability. And now I've just talked about kindness. Now, let's talk about number 5. Number 5, in my opinion, is you want someone with a conscience. Now, that's somewhat misleading in a way. I'll use the word awakened, someone with an awakened conscience, because we all have a conscience. I'm going to use this particular trait, perhaps, to expand into 2 very, very separate areas in relationships: intimacy and non-intimacy. What is the importance of having a conscience? Probably, I would say maybe about 4 or 5 months ago, I was having a conversation with a number of people, and I was listening to the conversation. A young girl was sharing some of her concerns. I wouldn't use the word concerns. She was being open, and she talked about her relationships, and apparently she had started seeing someone. This is an intimate relationship. She had started seeing someone, and she was asking questions. I was the only man I was the second person. The 2 people there who were male, I was one of them. And as she shared, she made a number of comments, and she was trying to get some information from the 2 men who were present, and trying to say, I want to understand a little bit more about his behavior. That's the person in her life. And I asked her a question. I said, what's important to you in a relationship? And she explained, and I said, okay. I said, well, I have a different view. I can't tell you where the relationship will go, because who knows? I don't have a crystal ball. Who the hell am I? I can't tell you what perhaps is going to happen. I don't know him. I don't even know you. I said, well, what I can tell you is this, and I can speak of this from a male's perspective. I said, one of the qualities you need in every relationship, especially an intimate relationship, because in this case, she was concerned about trust. Do I give my heart? Can I trust him? And I said, I don't know. The truth is, who knows? I said, well, one of the things you have to do is, the whole idea of dating is you want to collect data. That's the whole idea of dating. It's not to have fun and enjoy yourself. No. If you want to have fun, that's what you call it. We're just having fun. But if you want a meaningful relationship going somewhere, you want to collect information, data, and then you want to analyze the data very quickly. And from that analysis, you want to distinguish between whether this person is long-term, short-term, what are their intentions, what do they have in mind, And then you could decide whether you think you want to be intimate with them. I said one of the most important things is I said you must try and ask yourself the question, does he have a conscience? Yes, all of us have a conscience. But I said, so what I mean by that is, does he have an awakened conscience? I said, because the issue about trust, in your opinion, I said, you're worried about whether he'll be faithful. I said, well, I don't know. I said, but anyone who has an awakened conscience understands the importance of doing unto others as they would other people do unto them. And that simply means that they treat people the way they want to be treated. A conscience simply means it's a guidance system. It's like your internal referee. Remember, use this example if you're playing football. You have a referee that tells you that's wrong or that's right. If you have an awakened conscience, you automatically know the boundaries of a relationship, what is allowed. The awakened conscience allows you to stay within the boundaries of the relationship once it's been defined. And that's important, once it's been defined. So you don't go playing too close to the edges. There's a lot of happiness and joy and peace and abundance and harmony playing within the circle. There's sometimes, depending, you might feel that there's a better grass outside the circle and that something outside is better. If you have an awakened conscience, what you tend to find is that you stay within what we call the terms of engagement. So you respect the rules of the game, you respect the laws. So your conscience, an awakened conscience, is really a referee in a game. In this case, it's you. It's someone who has an inner awareness, who has that intuitive faculty that is awakened, where if they want to do something right, they would ask themselves, or the inner person, they don't even have to ask. The inner person will say, are you doing the right thing? Or this isn't right. And they're willing to listen. And you notice people who have an awakened conscience, it's not that they're not vulnerable. It's not that they're not susceptible to temptations or they're not susceptible to doing the wrong thing. It's simply that they try not to put themselves in an environment where the temptation will overwhelm their willpower. So I said to her, think about this. Just observe how he interacts with you and interacts with other people. How does he treat a pet? How does he treat a worker, perhaps who works in a place, you walk into a restaurant? Observe how he treats people. Someone once said that if you want to know the character of people, watch how they treat people below them, people who have nothing to offer them. Watch how he treats those people. Watch how he treats his family, his friends. Watch how he treats you. Effectively, what you're trying to do is like a dog. When you train the dog and you say to the dog, you can't have this bone. Now,